Thank you so much, Loch, for joining Vanessa and I today. We're so excited to talk with you.
Yeah, great to be here. Nice to meet you both, and looking forward to a great dialogue and trialogue.
Yes,
I know it's a unique aspect of this podcast is figuring out who's talking when. So we'll do it imperfectly.
It'll be whatever it is. Yeah. And I know that in our conversation, a lot of what we're going to be talking about and pointing to is something that people sometimes use the word awakening for. And we've found in our conversations with teachers that people use that word differently. Teachers use it differently. And of course, students and practitioners use it differently. So maybe a good place to start is just how you mean that word. What are you pointing to when you use that word?
Yes. Okay. That's a good place to start. I mean, on a simple level, the feeling of it is kind of, the word is used because it's a shift that feels like you're asleep and then you awaken. So it's almost as if you've been a dream character in your dream of life, going around thinking that there are monsters and there are a lot of threatening characters. And when you awaken, you have a bigger view of what is still real, but maybe not true, meaning the situations are the same, but they don't seem as threatening, and kind of real, but not you. So what really changes is the kind of feeling of identity, that you shift from a very small sense of self, almost, well, yeah, the other way to talk about it is really almost to feel like the way we live is in a type of consciousness that I could talk about it developmentally, and I can talk about it spiritually, and I could talk about it in different ways. But what it tends to feel like when people describe it, if they really feel where they're located during the day, is almost as if we're in a cloud of consciousness, or there's people who are more mental type almost feel like there's a little mini me behind their eyes looking out and commenting, or there's not just one mini me, it's actually a group or a little committee that's commenting, and they're all sitting in the seat of the self, the CEO seat. They keep rotating through and debating who should be sitting there. And then that consciousness is very small, so it's not even our body and our personality that we're waking up from. That's kind of an interesting, important point, that kind of remains basically the same, except calmer and less, anxious, more, fear-free and more shame-free, which is probably the most important identity piece. But that feeling of this small sense of self that we tend to try to just clean it up with positive self-help and, growing up processes, which are all very important, learning, but that if we stay within that small ego-based system of identity, it's really too small a system to deal with a full emotional life. It's too small to deal with an intimate life with a feeling of the fullness, and its perception feels like we're separate. There's a separate sense of self that feels like we're cut off, therefore we feel lonely, we feel anxious, we feel fearful of energy and not only things like moving objects, which you should be afraid of somewhat, or at least sure. Move out of the way. I don't know if you have to be afraid of them, but be quick. It's better that way. But the other feelings are as if we're scanning for danger all the time, not even protecting our body and our personality, but protecting this little mini-me system that has co-opted our boundary program and thinks as if there's a small separate self that needs to get something to eat to be okay, and it needs to get something someday. If I only get this, then I'll be okay. But that's not even about like, oh, don't be so greedy. It's like, it's greedy and it thinks it's you. It's not even that you think you're it. It thinks it's you, and it's taken over. and you don't even know it, and then it's operating your body mind, and your perception is clouded or like horse blinders, and that is your reality. And then we just kind of muddle along doing the best we can. And so awakening is literally stepping out of the cloud. One way that I kind of have found is the simplest, most direct way is feeling as if awareness, which is identified or attached, can open out of the cloud or drop down deeper or open up higher or take a half step back to look back through that pattern until you feel this more spacious, aware, and then embodied, interconnected feeling of a sense of being. And it's almost like you drop from head to heart mind, and you open to a field of awareness that isn't spacey, but spacious, and has this remarkable quality of intelligence and also kind of unconditional love. Like there's some support from what people feel like a lot of religious language is about, that support or that feeling of lack of support when they don't connect to that something greater than themselves. So the awakening is to a dimension of reality, and the premise in the kind of tradition that I'm in, and the main tradition I'm in is called the human being lineage.
My favorite lineage.
Which means all wise gals and all wise guys who basically have discovered this dimension, who report that they're happy, they're more loving, compassionate, they're motivated to live life, and they have a different relationship to pain and suffering, and they have a relief of certain kind of suffering, which allows them not to escape life. So the idea in awakening, as I define it, is not to transcend human condition, but to be more fully human. And that seems to just hinge upon moving from kind of a small mind to a larger mind, and a small sense of self to no self to a larger sense of self.
Yes.
And so it's some ways it's almost, it's not intellectual, and it's not philosophical or theological or requires any belief. It's almost more of a palpable figure ground shift of awareness, so that what's in the foreground is now a lot of fast moving thoughts and strong emotions that are being organized by a small habit of consciousness, and then awakening the background of this vast loving presence comes forward, and then the contents of consciousness are just held and included, but there's so much more capacity and space and dimensionality that allows for, you know, all the beautiful descriptions you've heard from people who write the poetry about it. Mm-hmm. But part of the issue is that they write a poetry about it, and then they just tell you to do the first couple practices, and they forget to fill in the whole gap.
Right.
How do you do it? So that's been my interest, is to kind of bring kind of learning theory, you know, more democratic interest in what's going on, finding and talking to all these different teachers, reading all these manuals, practicing, looking, and having awareness start to show itself to itself, and then check it out with students, check it out with other people to really see if it's real, what's true, what's real, what's elegantly simple. And the report is that we can talk further about it, but it seems awakening that relieves suffering and brings a sense of these natural positive qualities is accessible, learnable, teachable, and available as a natural capacity, but it takes some unique ways of learning and unlearning.
It's one of the things we loved about your work so much.
Exactly.
And we even use the word democratizing awakening because, you're one of the few teachers I've read who aren't just pointing to awakening as something that happens by grace. And as someone who's been in the field of psychology, transpersonal psychology specifically, for a very long time, and as two practitioners speaking for Brooke and myself, it's been very evident how I've shifted as I've understood my conditioning, as I've meditated, as I've had different experiences. So to me, it's very clear that there's a gradual awakening that happens. And maybe not all of it is under our conscious control as we know it.
Yeah.
But there is something we can do to get involved. And we love that about how you present this.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's so important. And one of the unique things is that there's preparation that can be done from our current sense of efforting, but then part of the system that I kind of found is that actually the already awake awareness can begin to intentionally know itself. Mm-hmm. Because when you are awakened, you kind of cross the threshold of initial awakening, you realize, the doer is not doing it, but there's doing happening, and yet it's not, you haven't become a puppet of the divine, that, there's no, which some people say as a stage, as if, there's no one here named Loch, and choices are just being made, and, and it's like, yeah, kind of, I can see it a little bit, but then the personality comes on board, and there's a intelligent heart mind that really wants to be known and nurtured and wants to actually be the leader.
Yeah, it's funny because we have all these traditions, religions, lineages, and it's held up as this like rare, special. I mean, this is everyone else's, all of our ego minds turn it into that, right? I'm not saying that that's what the teachers were trying to convey.
Some of them
certainly, yeah, right. And you talk about it as this very normal developmental potential or stage for human beings, which I think just demystifies so much of it and just makes it so much more accessible.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like more people can awaken than learn how to create microchips.
Right.
I don't know if I can do that.
I cannot figure out.
Yeah, I can't either.
Look at what humans are doing. They're doing all these other things, like.
Yeah, the minds are busy with really complicated things.
Yeah, right. Those are talents, but this is kind of almost a developmental stage. And it does, I'll just say that I do agree with Ken Wilber's premise that to stabilize awakening, it's not just awakening from an ego, that there's a waking up, there's a growing up, there's a cleaning up, and there's a showing up that helps to stabilize and actually allow you to live from this. That you can awaken and be immature and act out, which we've seen a lot of people who have, initial authentic awakenings. So it's not enough to just wake up from.
Yes, we're with you. It's been interesting having the opportunity to meet so many people, so many teachers who've had awakened or awakening processes, because I realized, oh my God, you have personalities. Oh my God, you still have sometimes a blind spot here or there, as you would point to a subpersonality or whatever someone calls it, a pain body. That's completely refreshing. I mean, I'm 44. I've been practicing Buddhism and studying these things since I was a teenager. How am I just understanding that people still have personalities? They still have blind spots. They still have unprocessed pain that can live in their system. And I think it's so important that we speak about that. One, so we understand our own journey more, right? We understand what the unfolding can be like. But two, so that when we're sitting with teachers, we recognize they're still humans and we don't deify them and create a guru that we then follow blindly. So it's really interesting.
Yeah. that recent, what was the name of that recent series on TV
the one of
The
Osho?
Netflix show.
yes.
Oh,
So you could really
so
see
good.
the almost like a childlike dependency that people go into, and then go into kind of a bliss ninny stage. Meanwhile, everyone else in the politicals are just doing the normal political things, including like having guns and
Crazy.
willing to kill each other and all sorts of crazy things. So but there are models, and I think this is kind of one of the democratic curiosities, is to see that there are sometimes extreme models that have said, that awakening is going beyond all emotions, or awakening is just pure awareness. It's transcending humanity and becoming awake. Enlightened means you have no normal human emotions, and I don't see that. I mean, if you all have to look at the Dalai Lama, right? And that's kind of more of what awakening looks like. It's a happy, joyous, but somebody who I saw who heard his friend had died in a Chinese prison and start crying, on stage. So there's a fullness and a richness and an energy to the awakened life that has that's really about a kind of a stage of development that goes up. It doesn't go like backwards or out of the human realm.
I also found it relieving that you don't speak about ego death the way sometimes other teachers do, right. Which I found personally, I think I have some fear systems around death. And so I started to find this very natural thing scary, because my mind was holding on to the concept of I don't want to die, and I don't want to lose my personality and all of these different things. So instead, you speak about shifting identity. And I wanted to take a moment and just read a little something from your book to share with the audience. Okay. So one of my favorite chapters, and I think Brooke also had a great appreciation for this because she pulled some quotes too.
We quoted heavily from this chapter.
was location, location, location.
Sure.
Also being a New Yorker, I get the real estate thing. So you wrote, in the open-hearted awareness approach to awakening and growing up, the simplest way to answer all questions about how to relieve the root of suffering is the same. Shift. Anytime you mistake a self-image, an emotion, or a belief for who you are, you need to shift and relocate your identity. You're not just shifting out of the problem, you're shifting into that which sees the situation differently. Once you shift, the answer will come from within you. In the simplest sense, we are shifting into a new awareness-based operating system. The first step is to shift out of ego identification and our current level of everyday mind. So Brooke and I also sometimes use the language different dimension of reality. You're talking about different levels of consciousness.
Yes.
It's very fundamental to your work. And quite frankly, it's been very fundamental, I think, for both of us, because as I've shifted into different levels of consciousness, I can understand teachings I didn't really get before.
That's right.
So I wondered if we could keep clarifying what you started in the first question, which is, what is the mini-me or ego identity? And what does it mean to shift into a different operating system that's awareness-based?
Yeah, so why don't I say a little about it, and then maybe we can do a little glimpse practice to see what people feel about it. Yeah, so, I mean, that's the thing, is that we're so identified, and even our, great intellectual, philosophical traditions and psychological traditions and educational traditions still operate within the cloud of this mostly conceptual mind. And even most people still believe, I think, therefore I am. So that's kind of a few, 100 years ago, that saying, it's still pretty much what most people think, and thinking has become faster and better and the kinds of learning related to thinking has been refined. And so even this sense that there's a non-conceptual awareness that's more intelligent than thinking and more primary is like, wait a minute, I know, you telling me just to be silent? You know, it's just like silence. Oh, I like silence. Yeah, that's like, I'll quiet and then my ego will feel calm. But it's literally a different level of mind that when you leave the gap of thought-based knowing to not knowing, which is kind of a Zen movement of letting go, then you have that peace of mind or silence or relief, like being aware of space with no content. But then the curious thing is the awareness aware of space, or what's it like if the space is actually aware and you're aware from space? Back to thought, feeling, and sensation. So there's a larger sense of where you're aware from or who's aware, and you're not going from thought to know. You're not orienting by thought. You start to orient by something that's kind of not on the psychological map, which is called nature of mind, or Turiya in Hinduism. It's awake space, or nature of mind, or spacious awareness. And it's prior to thinking, and it's also the wisdom mind that's beyond thought, that can use thought as a tool. So it's really like, this is like the key thing that seems to be so new and initially very difficult, because we're trying to know this with our mind.
That's right.
And we're trying to just let go or just sit there and hope it comes up. And we get some relief. We usually get, like a lot of people in meditation will get to the stress management dimension of not knowing. So there's some quiet, silence, but as if they're qualities that you're aware of or that you're feeling. But the question is this peace of mind what you're aware of, or is the peace of mind who you are, to which thoughts and states, emotions are appearing? So that's the figure ground shift that initially people just get a glimpse of. Like some people listening may just kind of get a glimpse of that, and then as soon as you go back to check with the mind, did I really have that? Then you're out of it.
Right.
So that's the thing, is that there's a not knowing and then a not knowing that knows. And the stabilizing of awakening is the awareness-based knowing is embodied and open-hearted and refers to itself and then uses thought as needed. So it's kind of like a continuous intuition, or a flow state, or being in the zone, which people may have experienced in sports or music or other activities where you're optimally functioning. You don't have to be quiet and withdrawn or in a quiet place. You can even be in New York City, and you can be on a subway, and it's all the presence is palpable, because there's been a little shift of where you're aware from, which is the location, what's aware, and what are information and perception and experience appearing to. They don't appear to the thinker that thinks about thought to put it in a category. So literally the screen of your mind is quiet, but you're in kind of the knowing that a Tai Chi master goes into, trains to be in, which means you could respond if you needed to. at any moment, both verbally and physically if you needed to. And there's a sense of safety, okayness, or well-being. So this can be trained. So those are the qualities. So you kind of know what the kind of states are, what the stages are, what the traits are, and where you can go off a little bit. And then you start to feel almost like you're fine-tuning your own instrument a little bit, navigating. But what's navigating is the awareness itself. So that requires this first two is realizing that non-local awareness is what's aware, and then from non-local spacious awake awareness, the local awareness is what focuses inside, outside. You're no longer using attention, which actually is overtrained in most meditation systems, and the more you learn to meditate, the more you've created obstacles to the next stage of meditation. of awakening, because you're getting too good at the system that isn't operating when you're awake.
That's really interesting. That's super helpful to point out that, like, the way that a certain kind of meditation can kind of hold you in place.
That's right. Yeah.
Hold you in.
And it's not that, it's bad. It's a preliminary, but it's meant to be a preliminary practice.
Yeah.
Just to calm the mind, soothe the animal. Soothe the animal body and get a sense of the energy that's not overwhelming, the physical energy, the emotional energy, and the interconnected energy, which we can talk about a little bit later because that becomes a big part of it. But so it's really, the premise is that if you do it gradually, there's studies now, Willoughby Britton from Brown University has done studies about the dangers of actually deconstructing during meditation for people who are beginners. Because if you go gradually, I think it's more dangerous to do gradual than direct practice.
Interesting.
Because you actually deconstruct the ego and you deconstruct the ego defenses. And if you don't even have it on your map that you're looking for the new operating system, you're left in the gap.
I actually had that happen when I did Shambhala meditation. Yeah, and I sat for a long time and felt like I just kept saying, I feel like I'm falling apart. I feel like I'm falling apart. And finally, I just had to stop meditating for a while.
That's a fairly common experience. And unfortunately, I think it's part of the gradual path that doesn't give a map or stays too long in the absence. Without and hoping the presence will show up, but it doesn't often unless you know how to know it.
Yeah.
So way,
when you say direct practice, you mean knowing how to know it, knowing how to know awake awareness specifically.
Yes.
Is that
and how rather than deconstructing, rather than usual path is calming through one point at attention, calming the mind, focusing, and then observing contents until you realize, oh, I'm not my thoughts, I'm not my feelings, I'm not, and then the egoic point of view is gone, the ego defenses are gone, and then you can get flooded by unconscious material that was kept in. Whereas if this method of having awareness go out of the cloud into the space that's awake, and then feel like the awake space is the new operating system that's embodied, that's made of awareness energy, and the awareness energy is able to see and feel all the parts and all the emotions immediately. Say, well, come and the way it feels them is through a kind of a natural love and connection, not from a detached observer. So that position is what often is almost a depersonalization movement that can, rather than this kind of embracing awareness, that is the natural condition. So awakening doesn't feel like a sky. It literally feels more like everything is connected. So emptiness, that's kind of what the word emptiness means, interconnected. It doesn't what we think it means in the West. It means it's empty of separate selves. So empty of separate selves means interconnected.
And it
which is a lot different than lost in space.
And lost in space, which
it doesn't exactly imply no self.
That's right. Doesn't imply no self.
Which is very relieving. I mean, recently, I think if I put it on your model, I had a waking in experience. And I've sort of been there for a while. My stories of unlovable, none of that is convincing. I can't seem to make myself a problem. All of these things, because I had quite a bit of fear around awakening. I've been on this path a long time, really afraid of what it would be like if I let go. And in some ways, because of all the concepts that were coming into my mind and how my mind was holding on to them. Your ego's going to die. There's no self. Will I lose my husband then? What will happen to my life, right? So there was always this sense of every time something started to shift, I would almost experience myself tensing at that point, like gripping. Yeah. And what's interesting is it feels extremely good not to be identified with the problem-making kind of mini-me. Feels extremely relieving. Yet I had so much fear about that shift. I wonder if you could speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of, I'll do a little, there's different models, and so you kind of have to say that everyone is kind of allowed to have their own view of it. But even, in the Tibetan Buddhists, they talk about the 3 turnings of the wheel. The first turning of the wheel is anatta, is the emptiness of self. There's not a self. But even then, Buddha would never answer that question, is there a self or is there not a self? And ultimately said there is an unborn and uncreated and unbecome. If there weren't, there would be no liberation. So it's not as if there's nothing. And then the sense of there not being a self, there's not a self, there's just these 5 dimensions, 5 skandhas, 5 heaps of thought, feeling, sensation, and they're appearing, they're real, but there's not anyone who's the driver of the chariot. Then the next one is the Heart Sutra, which kind of said, oh, wait a minute, even the 5 heaps are empty. There's nothing there. They're not solid either. And then the third turning of the wheel said, yeah, and what's here when they're not here is this awake consciousness which has positive qualities. So there's not a separate self. There's comes back to almost more of a larger self that then has a conventional self or an ego function or a personality that's part of its vehicle. So the sense that, you're not getting rid of the ego, you're just realizing that the ego function has been trying to be an ego identity. And the ego function is very helpful and useful to remember your phone number and drive a car and things like that. And it's part of the human relative reality and conventional reality. When you say, and someone said, "Hey, Buddha," he turned around, right?
One presumes.
You think, I don't know, it wasn't in the text though, but I was kind of assuming that seems reasonable because he was talking and walking. But anyhow, it's so it's it's kind of this all at onceness that includes the ocean of awareness that's appearing as our unique waves of our personality and our personhood and our humanity, that has there's a dance going on and a recognition and a realm of precious human birth. So that has, relative personality and people and relationships and all that's good. It's really only this, like, who's the center? Like, that's the suffering that can be removed and shifted, is who's driving the vehicle. Is it the small self? Is it the no self? Or is it the larger self? And then you have a self-driving vehicle, right? Which is good, without fear. So that feeling then can embrace all the parts of you that are traumatized parts. So instead of what you went through by deconstructing the sense of self and then hanging out in the gap and getting flooded, you go right to the solution and right to the upgrade of the operating system of the loving, open-hearted awareness that is interconnected with everyone, that isn't taking on other people's energies, because it kind of just moves right through you, and there's such a bigger feeling of capacity and openness and support. And then there's a feeling of safety, well-being, and then like a flow state, optimal functioning. You start to be able to talk and walk actually better, and less stress and less worry and less fear from the small sense of self. So it's this secondary self that's the no self. It's not this personality or the ego function or your body mind. It's this no self is not the self. And when people have that initial awakening, because they think that's who they are, they think, oh, this is Locke. This is what Locke. Oh, I'm not Locke. There is no Locke. But no, that wasn't Locke in the beginning. That was the one. That was the one that thought he was Locke.
Right. Yeah.
Locke is still here. There's still, there is a Loch Ness. There's Loch Ness. It's not a myth, but it's not a actual running the show. So this feeling of this co-opting, which happens at like 1.5 to 3 years old, what develops in a child is what's called self-awareness is the psychological term, not the spiritual term. So self-awareness means a child looks in a mirror and doesn't know it's them, but at 1.5, you put a mark on their cheek, and now they look in the mirror and they go like this. So they start to know, oh, that's me. Oh, I have a name. Oh, and then they start to create an inner parent or voice that says, you shouldn't touch the stove. It might be hot. So that internalized, and so who's the you it's talking to? Who's talking and who's the you? So it splits off this, kind of baby that is in kind of, primary process thinking, and then secondary process creates a thinker or a mini-me system that starts thinking it's you, and then it tries to solve the problem of identity and satisfaction as if it's a body, but there's no body. So that problem solver, if that problem solver can relax its job of identity, and then if the premise is that there's some other awareness here that's safe and open, and you can be aware from that and be alert and responsive, not kind of dumbed down or spaced out, then people might try that. We might try a short little glimpse practice.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. So it's very simple. This one is, and again, this one is good because it shows you how quick the shift can be. It shows you how close the other dimension of awareness is if it happens to work. Anybody it may work for, may not. It's, each of the glimpses some people find helpful, others, they kind of doesn't work for. It's not about the person who's listening, whether it's often about the match of glimpse rather than their capacity. So just to let people know. But if you really kind of feel that there's almost this secondary self that's not you, and it's not about, we're not getting rid of problems in the world. We're not saying there's no issues or stuff to deal with or personality or things in the world that are problems. But what I'm going to ask is, what is it like if there's no problem to solve on the level of identity? So just that problem solver that's looking for, who am I, what's going on? So we're all sitting comfortably, and there's no tigers in the room, so this is good. So we know that problem is not a problem. So this is about the feeling of what's here when the problem solver relaxes. So just simply understand this inquiry and then kind of say it to yourself, but then look with awareness and feel kind of back and down and out and into the field of what's aware of everything. So just by asking yourself this simple inquiry, what's here now when there's no problem to solve?
This is one of my very favorite pointers of yours. I love it every time. It's so helpful. It's
yeah.
Like, instantly. You know?
Yeah. So you can, for those who are listening at home, you can either close your eyes or open, but you want to feel like when you hear the words, what's here now and there's no problem solved, and then just relax the problem solver and let awareness feel the dimension of awareness that is aware of thoughts, feelings, sensations, and where are you aware from if you're not aware from that point of view? And just feel what's absent, what's changed, and let go of. And then let awareness notice any new qualities, any dimensionality, spacious, open, relief, peace, quiet, silence. And the feeling of being rather than thinking or doing. And just not going up to thought to orient, and not going down to sleep to rest. Just let awareness know itself and everything else from awareness. So we probably could do the whole podcast like this, but
I kind of want to now. Why talk about anything else now?
So, just to say to people that even if you're like 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, like that's a full glimpse. Like just the unhooking, just the letting go, the dropping, the relief, the relaxing of the efforting or the doing, and then the discovery of some qualities, and then a new feeling of knowing or alertness that's not orienting by thought is really curious that it's here no matter, it's not dependent on conditions, like a quiet place or a...
Right. Yeah, and Vanessa and I make a great team in many ways, and one of them is that we're structured fairly differently in terms of ego stuff. So Vanessa is an avoid the void person, fear of death, holds on more. I am a lost in space, fall into the gap, and I am the sock puppet for God, and I don't exist anymore. So I've spent some time on emptiness bed rest, as I call it, which is pretty uncomfortable place to be, actually. Or whatever it is. I don't know. It's a nowhere place to be. But, so I just want to underscore, because the practice you just took us through, for those who are structured more like me, you didn't take us to nowheresville, to I'm nothing. There's something there. You're held, as you were describing before, in this interconnected field, which can help for those of us who tend to, I'm not a fear of death person. I'm the fear of life person. So it's like, I can just disappear into the gap.
Right. Yes.
which, it doesn't feel good because it turns into like low functionality and all those things. So to be able to connect with that sense of there is something here larger than me, I'm held within something,
yes,
is so helpful.
And yet you probably feel also that space that's awake, but now it's awake and energetic.
Right.
So it's still primary. It's just not. It's not only that. It's not either this or that.
Right.
It's the both and, but the awake is dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the full thing, the full awakening in a second to get a feel for what it's kind of like. And then the checking is to see, but many people who go in will get, what I call facets of the diamond of awakening. So some people will get more relax and peace. Some people get a little more love. Some people will get bliss. Some people will get, creativity and all those will come at different times. But it takes you into the unity or the non-separation that's equally inside and out, and that's equally awareness, energy, interconnection, freedom, and embodiment. So those two wings, the Shakti and the Shiva, the Shiva silence and the Shakti dance, and not just one or the other. That's what I feel is awakening to both those, feminine, masculine, Shakti, Shiva, dynamic, stillness, contemplation and action.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's beautiful. Judith Blackstone. Are you aware? Do you know
yes,
Judith?
I know. Yeah.
We studied with Judith. We got certified in her method. And you and her both speak about, recognizing the space inside of you and the space outside of you and recognizing that they're one and the same, just using different language, which can be, at moments, I find it incredibly relieving. And I've had moments in the past where I felt, oh God, I have no boundaries to begin with. I'm one of those energetic, sensitive people who's
You're more energetic,
absorbing everything, right? I don't even know how that works, but feels like you're absorbing everything. And so almost at the point of recognizing oneness, I go, oh no.
Right.
Right? Merging. I don't know what it is. It's just an oh no, right?
Yeah.
Do people ever describe that to you? You work with so many clients over the years.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar in both of you describing those. And some of it I find is to kind of get a good enough map that really shows you the detours and the eddies. And those are the detours and the eddies, the more too spaced out or too afraid of life, afraid of death, too subtle, and then too afraid of the energy. But it's when the awareness and energy mix, you're not going back to what's called subtle mind and body, which are the meditative or the living from an ego that is dealing with energy. You're in the ground that energy is, there's no place for it to hurt.
Right.
So you really feel like an ocean. There's so much more depth and stillness to the energy. And even somebody whose energy is strong, you walk into a room, it feels like it's kind of just, the capacity of the vastness is just kind of eating it for lunch. It's kind of like going, oh, like this is little effervescent tickles,
Sounds great.
Yeah, I remember when I first started meditating with Judith and she was taking us through her fundamental consciousness practices. What I was doing was experiencing energy, not what you would call awake awareness or she would call fundamental consciousness. I didn't yet have the pointer to recognize the subtlety of the other experience. And in your book, you spoke about matter, energy, space, as
Yeah.
well as this non-dual awareness as ground of beings. And, it's very obvious. We can identify with our thoughts. We
Yeah.
can identify with our physical body.
Yeah.
Can people identify as energy? It seems like I've been
Absolutely.
observing that.
Yes, that is a big category that's very important to recognize, that people tend to be more mental or more energetic emotional types. You can be mental emotional or energetic emotional, or energy or more mental. And there's one thing that needs to be recognized, is that's not on the map, is there's a way that human beings actually perceive energy in the field of the room or the space. That's one of the senses.
Right.
So people just, you have to, like, that helps people so much to realize, no, that's real.
Right.
You're not,
Yeah.
then you could be projecting too. That's another thing that mixes with it. You could be projecting your fear. Oh, it feels like that person's afraid. Okay, that can happen. But the other person can be afraid and you're not afraid, and they're smiling and they're afraid.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, there's nothing wrong, everything's fine. I'm completely confident. And you're going like, oh my God, you're literally, so that's called subtle body perception. Okay, that is a dimension of our being that some people are more sensitive to. And then subtle mind is kind of meditative mind. Subtle mind. So everyday mind is this cloud, which is more mental, emotional, functional, creates managers in the system, but then everyone's got protectors and hurt parts that are traumatized and hurt. And then the managing system, though, tends to be what's called everyday mind or ego mind. And then there's subtle mind, which is ability to go into an observing, non-judgmental awareness. And then there's subtle body, which is if you just drop and go, Om, you're out of everyday mind, but now you've opened up this door of energy sensitivity. And certainly people who are highly sensitive, emotional people are people who have this, strong sense, just like somebody has good eyesight or good hearing. It's one of the senses, I think. Mm-hmm. In Buddhism, thinking is considered the sixth sense. So that's important for mental types, that's a sense, it's an organizing sense, but who is it appearing to? Who are the senses appearing to? They're appearing to awareness. And so energy is appearing to awareness. So we move on kind of a map from everyday mind to subtle body, subtle mind, and then getting this feeling of awake awareness as the knowing, non-conceptual, perceiving that can perceive energy without getting identified, can perceive thoughts, parts of ourselves that isn't leaving. So pure awareness is aware of itself. As soon as pure awareness is aware of anything, it's awareness energy. So even the non-dual people who say, oh, I'm just pure awareness and everything is clouds and birds moving through, that's a meditative state. You're no longer you're in a witness consciousness. As soon as awareness perceives anything, it's connected to it. It knows it by being it. Yeah. It's inherent within it. So, but then if awareness is 51%, the reality, you won't get overwhelmed by any energy that happens. Soon as mental energy or emotional energy or more psychic energy is primary, then it'll take you for a ride.
Hell yeah. And like when you're aware of energy, I mean, there's so much aliveness in your body and energy moves. Yes. You almost feel like you're a reed in the ocean,
Yes.
So, and then a lot of people I know who deal with this, and of course, Brooke and I have experienced this in different ways, they go into the manager role. But then that manager is exhausting because
the manager cannot handle it.
It cannot handle it.
Yeah.
And you start to exhaust yourself trying not to be around that person, trying not to read the news, trying, you know.
Right. Yeah. So you're either going to go into repression, which leads to depression, or you're going to go into anxiety by trying to manage it and letting yourself feel it. So anxiety and depression are the symptoms of too small an operating system and being a sensitive human being. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what else you're going to do. You're going to be neurotic and anxious, or you're going to be depressed and shut down or in some role. Yes, hello everyone. I'm very spiritual. I'm a meditation teacher. Hello. Yes. Lovely.
Or if you're me, you'll alternate. Anxious,
yeah, you
depressed,
alternate.
Anxious,
yeah, I know.
Manager.
I'm like done all of the things.
So you have different parts will take over. So the awakening, back to the original question, is literally that there is a non-part based, non-subpersonality, non-ego function that is the primary dimension of who you are that feels big. Literally, it feels both vast or spacious or open. That's the first quality. And then it's knowing from the openness rather than thought. And then it's embracing or supportive so that now it has awareness and interconnection without identifying or feeling overwhelmed. So that transition from awareness-based knowing, if you're in thought-based knowing, it's too small for the amount of energy that a human being has because we are interconnected with everything already. Mm. Right. So it really takes that upgrading to that system of open-heartedness ultimately, which has love and compassion. To be able to feel what is like one mind. It feels like everything is in your mind. Everything's in, all connected, and it's just your mind isn't here anymore. It's like everywhere, and everyone, you're connected to everyone. Like I'm right now, feel like we're in the same place. We're right here in the same place.
That's right.
We're in the same mind. We're not, distant, and that's the feeling, and it's safe. So it's that weird transition that's the hard part.
That's right.
Yes.
And so in some ways the system I do is quickly going and only staying like 3 seconds to 3 minutes in the pure awareness, but just to unplug from everything. Mm. And then as the awareness, it's immediately awareness energy. Oh, but now it stays primarily and now comes back, and you're now realizing, okay, I'm going to meet emotions, parts, and thoughts. So stay open and loving and big, and here they come. Ready? Here they are. But you're like, they're, well, but I need to talk to you, and I need to, like, okay, I hear you. And you stay embracing and aware from the awareness energy, open-heartedness, so that they can't collapse you. Because really that's the thing, is you have these experiences or glimpses, and what takes us back is the habit of becoming small and collapsed around either a strong emotional traumatic part or a manager part that feels like, well, we got to be safe. Well, that was nice, but what are you going to do? We got to go somewhere now, and it grabs you, and then you have to realize that the feeling of that, and then learn to return, re-recognize, and then come back and embrace that part, not get rid of it, not deny it, not belittle it, that even the protective parts, the angry parts, the terrorized parts, the hateful parts, they're not bad.
Right.
They're literally, when you meet them in their rage, they're like, I'm trying to protect you from the other rageful people. Aren't I supposed to match their energy? well, we may not need that now. What would you do if you didn't have to do that right now? It's like, really? There's an option? Yeah. Right now, maybe when you're a child, not so much, but right now, how about that? Like, oh, wow, I would go have some fun or something.
Yeah,
they literally are these loving, compassionate warriors. And we're trying to spiritualize them away.
Right. Yes.
And with a,
yeah. And that,
right?
as we round out the conversation we've had a chance to have with you, it gets to the, what is the point? Because we think that it's this idea of becoming the spiritual person or some other persona because we're doing it from the smaller self, but all the pointers you've just given, that it's too small an operating system to live in without missing our lives in a certain way. We can't really be in them,
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The little spiritual ego can't grow up to be awakened. So that is the part about no self. That's just that little identity has to realize, oh, I'm a part of something greater. Oh, now I'm still part of it. So it's not dying, you're not killing it, you're not fighting it, but you're not letting the kid drive the car,
Right.
Right. What's bad idea.
What's amazing about speaking about it as a shift and speaking about it as an operating system is for many years I've had wonderful spiritual concepts, and I've had glimpses and tastes, things like compassion for others and self, or forgiveness, or even, because I went to school for transpersonal psychology, meeting yourself with non-resistance and even with love. And I've always gotten there to some degree, glimpses.
Yes.
But so often you're just coming at it from concept, and then you're trying to make yourself meet yourself, but from ego identity.
Exactly.
And you just can't soften. You just can't. And then you're mad that you can't soften, and now you're judging yourself. And
that's right.
And all those things. And when you realize, okay, this is just part of how the brain structure works. It's part of how the nervous system works.
That's right.
That a shift needs to happen into what can actually feel safe, which is this larger experience of awareness. And that once you shift there, everything is held, seen, felt, heard, and experienced differently.
That's it.
Then, if there is in fact a problem, you have a whole new operating system to solve it from that's not projecting the past onto your present or future, which is game-changing because we're all just operating from past models over and over again in innocence. But man, it hurts. Yeah.
So let's the three of us and our audience, exactly what you said is really in terms of the model and the teaching and the movement from understanding to the shift. It's like, what is all this? You can learn so much, and then you try to develop a self that has compassion for the self. Which self is having compassion for the self? I don't know, I could try. Well, this self, and now this other self said, what are you having compassion for that self for? Because I need a little compassion. and
the division goes on.
and then but it's all being done by the parts within the cloud. And so, but when the concept of what you just said, which was said with words, is but you just realize that if you shift out of the cloud into this, there's already this dimension that's already loving and has all the things I've been searching for. Well, okay, now where's the gap here? What? That wasn't that hard to understand. Mm-mm. But that's pretty. That's the linchpin to this whole thing, right? But but the little mini-me's don't want to remember that. They still want to but we haven't tried all the things that I learned.
They want to do a good job. I picture them I just want to do a good job.
Still.
Yeah, I got some more ideas to do, and we can. So it's that forgetting, which is really the unawakening back. You drop into the awareness that's already loving and awakened. It's loving you, and then you get caught and triggered, and then you can't remember from there that view of that whatever part of that system that's sitting in the seat of self is going like, oh yeah, that's right. Remember what you did before? Well, what did you do before? Well, you shifted out of, well, yeah, shifted out of that, but that's not that easy to do. You can't just do that all the time. You're going to end up, remember, you might end up, being afraid of death, or you could be a couch potato. Mm-hmm. So, we can't, like all of a sudden it's like, the thing you read is the answer to all the problems is like the people raise the hand. Well, what about this? What about that? The answer to all the problems is shift. In other words, that's all you have to remember is like, oh, I'm identified or attached with a part. Oh, that causes suffering. Oh, yeah. Oh, there's an option. There's another option. What is it? Is it really complex, like a theory or do I need to read a book about it? No, you don't need. Just let awareness open and find that which is already aware and loving and embrace everything. So literally, it's just feel like you're identified. Everyone can do this kind of, just feel like you're identified with that part and you're thinking about thinking, and then see what it's like if awareness just opens to space. And then the key is you can't just, that's not enough. You have to see, okay, now I'm aware of space, so I'm out, but now I'm aware from space. Is space aware? And that takes a little, you can't think about it, you have to feel it. So then you feel from space back. So why don't we do you want to do a little glimpse practice?
I think so, yes.
Great.
Yeah. So this one will, so what I'll do is we'll do one that's visual. So a lot of meditations are done with eyes closed, but ultimately you want to get the whole system on board. Otherwise you have eyes closed. As soon as you get up off the cushion, you're going to be triggered back, micro-triggered back into associations that lead you to the old habit. So sometimes I call this returning the eyes to their natural state. So this way is the door of the eyes. So we'll just do a short version of it. So basically what we'll do is simply allow awareness to move around, not only to the sides, but literally feel as if somehow awareness can move and become aware of the space behind you, so that you have this open panoramic view. But what we'll do is we'll start with our eyes kind of resting, and one way to feel that awareness is moving is to start to feel your peripheral vision starts to open. So when your peripheral vision is open, your eyes are not actually moving, but your awareness from your grasping mind is keeping you pinpointed to look for danger. And when people who drive, actually, in order to drive well, to do one of the activities that we do that's perhaps the most dangerous, driving a one-ton vehicle, on a road with other one-ton vehicles at 60 miles an hour while people are texting, is you drive best and you enjoy driving if you're in this open panoramic flow state. So what we're going to do is literally have the brain follow awareness around, and then open our view, and then have a feeling from our open view that the awareness includes our body and is interconnected, and we'll see how that works. So just kind of describing it so I don't surprise people, but it's a fairly simple way of opening. It's kind of a form of sky gazing. So just looking relaxed and receiving light and feeling like you kind of look straight ahead or a little bit up, and then gently start to open your peripheral vision slowly without strain, equally left and right at the same time. So just no rush, but just start to feel awareness is opening, and as awareness opens, your vision opens, and you start to feel a more spacious view, and you can actually breathe in cool air and smile. And then allow awareness at some time to begin to come to the sides of your body. And as it does, awareness can kind of let go of seeing and begin to be aware of the space on the sides in which sound is coming and going. And then somehow, without quite knowing how it's happening, awareness can feel and move by itself. So it continues around to be aware of the space behind you in which sound is coming and going. So you feel somehow the absence of anything and a feeling of space, almost as if awareness has your back. So just feel this open view above you, below you, within you, all around you, to the sides, in front, behind. And just enjoy, again, breathing in, smiling. Feel this open view. And be aware of the space and the awareness that's open. And then curious, are you aware of the spacious awareness? Or what's it like when you're aware from the spacious awareness? Does it feel like if the space was aware of itself from outside at first? Just so you kind of unplugged from thought, and yet you're alert, and you've unplugged from orienting even to your senses for just a moment, but that there's this alert, clear, timeless, boundless, open intelligence that's aware of space within and all around. And then just notice that as this space, you can be aware now back toward your body. And as this awareness begins to be curious, notice that the awareness is feeling the energy of sound, the energy of the aliveness in the room. And then this awareness, which remains the primary way of knowing, begins to feel the awareness and energy within your body. So there's a feeling of a spacious and pervasive, alert awareness that feels silent, still, clear, open, but is equally inside and out. Is aware of what's moving inside, of what's moving outside. And it feels as if you can breathe in and let out a sigh. So equally outside and in. And then let the awareness just scan through your body, the field of your body, like an ocean of awareness that's arising as this wave of aliveness. And see whether it needs to have a manager centered in your body. And upon not finding one or needing one, just allow this awareness to be aware from everywhere, of everything, and able to respond as needed, just like you're driving. So just feeling a sense of having dropped from head to heart mind. So you feel a contact with this awake space and intelligence that's equally aware from your whole body, from top to bottom, and a feeling of interconnectedness with everything and everyone. So the awareness is primary and the energy is dancing. And see whether you feel a kind of safety, okayness, well-being, ability to respond if you needed to, and just rest as this open-hearted awareness. Just being, What's it like to be without orienting to thought? So just see what's here when there's nothing to do and nowhere to go. And kind of enjoying a kind of bliss or joy or love or just effervescence as one of the dimensions. While you can still be aware of things and body parts and emotions and parts of you that may be showing up, just feel like all sensations, thoughts, and emotions and parts of you are welcome from this embracing, open-hearted interconnectedness. And whatever's happening is fine, just feeling rather than thinking from this awarenessing. So just see, what is the feeling of being like? What are the qualities that show up? What do you notice? Either of you two notice anything?
Yeah, that was a beautiful shift. Because it has that feeling, again, I was talking about, of being held in something much larger at first. And then the part that was really interesting for me was like it getting kind of coming through.
Right.
You know, because I do the lost in space thing. So the like reconnecting through the
awareness energy.
That feels good. You know,
and you don't have to be lost in space and then back in.
Exactly. You don't have to toggle between the two extremes, which of course, yeah.
In Tibetan Buddhism, they call it mixing practice. Being, mixing space with awareness and then mixing awareness with energy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's mixing. You're not actually doing it, but you're noticing that they're mixed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing.
And there's something so profound about recognizing that movement and stillness happen at the same time. You know, your breath and the quiet. That to me, when I get that pointer, is such a depthful one, because it's pointing you towards aliveness, right? Like, we are at the same time aware and still, and yet there's life, there's movement, there's energy, and both happen right at once.
That's right, and they're not threatening. And what's changed is where you're aware from. All the other dimensions are more present, but you're aware from a more spacious, rather than small, point of view, right? Yeah. Is that what it feels like?
Yes,
absolutely.
Large, like you're quite
really large. Yeah.
Quite, I think John Prendergast said this to us once, Brooke, but talking about how you feel like your body is being held within awareness, right? Like all of a sudden, instead of locating as this body, there's something larger and your body's held within it. And I heard it and I thought, that sounds nice. And then months later I went, oh,
it is nice.
I understand what he's talking about. It's something much vaster.
Yeah. And then you even feel like it's appearing, as this awareness, that it's made of awareness. It's not two things like awareness and then the body is in it.
Yes.
Like an object in space. That's the energy dimension. That's the Shiva and Shakti. So that you can have that energy. You don't have to feel like the space allows you to be solid, but the space allows you actually to feel more dynamic, but supported by something bigger. Doesn't keep your dynamism either solid or overwhelming.
Right. The support of something bigger, I think, is so important for so many of us. I mean, the problem of aloneness is likely a fairly ubiquitous human situation. So when I looked for spirituality to begin with, I'm like, why did I even go on a spiritual path, as I start to realize how corrupted that word has been? And it was like, well, I was kind of curious what happens after death. There was that big question, as that's a big thing for me. And also not to feel so alone, like what's beyond just this little mini me. that search for truth where you feel a part of it all in a different way.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say a little, just because I was just looking at what's called the Tibetan Book of the Dead.
Sure.
But
very familiar.
I'll just say a little something about that, because why not? So the actual translation is the Book of Natural Liberation, that in the state in between, that liberates you in the state in between. And the description of the first part is, if you can realize the interconnected awareness, energy, bliss here, recognize it right away, because that's who you are. And then you'll have no problem, because that's what death is like. Wow. So these descriptions, which, near-death experience, the loving light, that's what it's like. And then the rest of the book is, if you don't happen to recognize this, because you never recognized in your lifetime, then you got to go back. Now we got the rest of the book.
Let's talk about it. Yeah.
So I figure in some ways that's one of my main things I've been starting to say in the beginning, of saying, look, I'm going to introduce you to this, whether you believe it's helpful for death or whether it's helpful for now and death. Either way, it's kind of what's real, and what they're saying is the realization of what it's like, what it feels like. And when you feel that, you feel, you realize it's not the gap, it's the bliss.
Mm-hmm. What a
Thank
relief.
you so much. I know.
Woo!
I feel
it's just
it.
Transition. Yeah, you feel it, right?
Yeah.
I feel it.
Yeah.
I mean, we're just, for everyone listening, we are scratching the surface. Loch has a long history. He had an awakening experience very young in life. I'm very young. I should put quotes around that. But young in life. And you've been a psychotherapist and you've been teaching. So just go read his book. And maybe even, if I could offer some advice, listen to the audio, because at the end of the day, sometimes these concepts are so amazing, they pop something open. It's like, oh, but usually it's the practice. It's something that actually gives you the support to shift that creates like the real alchemy, the real landing pad in a whole new operating system.
That's right. Yeah. So the book is trying to give a full map, of it, but the menu is not the meal. You can't eat the book. You can try to eat the book. If there's nothing else around, it's okay. But literally the CD, the 3 CDs, I kind of go through most of the practices in kind of an order. And if you can get the first sense of what that is, that awareness is unhooking from thought and opening to space, and then becoming aware of spacious awareness. And I go through it kind of step by step. So you get this first part, and I'll get the second part. And then I'll have you do it for external types, which is going out. And then I have it do it for internal types, which is dropping within. So you go so far within, like a microcosm, that it opens up. So there tends to be 2 types of people generally. Some people are told go within. They can't go within. They just open up outside and they connect. So different learning styles, different doorways. But the main, to come back to kind of the thing you were saying, that it's really that it's not the information. It's not once you have a good enough map, it's really getting that you can shift into something that's already safe. That's part of the good enough map, is that it's not dangerous, it's not death, it's there's something there. But then once you get there, you're not going there to transcend, you're going there to come back. So you don't get spaced out or blissed in. Which I've been in both places.
Yes, we can relate to that too. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for all of your work and for talking with us and for sharing all of this.
Absolutely. I really love talking to both of you, and you're doing some great work, and you're sincere and helping people, I think, with bringing this to a lot of people.
Thank you.
Oh,
it means a lot.
thank you.